Beyond the noise of the world lies a place of deep thought and even deeper cinematic reflections. We invite you to slow down and experience the power of storytelling that challenges your mind and touches your heart. Hit subscribe now for your daily dose of wisdom.
The drive out to my beach house always had a way of slowing my heartbeat down. 8 months. That's how long I'd been away, tied up with my sister's estate after she passed. Then a knee surgery that kept me off my feet longer than I'd planned. Then just the slow, heavy grief that makes you avoid the places that remind you of better times. My wife and I used to spend every summer at that house. After she died 6 years ago, I kept it. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I wasn't ready to let go of the last place that still smelled like her. I pulled off the highway onto the familiar 2-lane road that cuts through the salt grass, and I noticed the mailbox post had been repainted. White. It had been weathered gray the last time I was here. I slowed down and looked at it. Fresh white paint, clean edges. I figured maybe the county had done some work along the road. I told myself that. I kept driving. When I came around the last bend and the house came into view, I stopped the car in the middle of the road. The yard was immaculate. I had left it in late October. The sea oats were overgrown, there were dead leaves piled against the porch railing, and the gravel path from the road to the front door needed raking. I had meant to deal with it in the spring, but the yard I was looking at now was clean. The gravel had been raked. The porch railing had a new coat of paint blue, a slightly different shade than I remembered. There were 2 clay pots on either side of the front steps with small yellow flowers in them. I sat there with my foot on the brake, engine running, staring at those yellow flowers for probably a full minute. I own that house outright. I have owned it for 22 years. There is no property management company, no caretaker, no arrangement with anyone. I had given a spare key to my son years ago, but he lives in Portland and hadn't mentioned anything about coming down. No one should have been at that house. No one had any reason to be at that house. I pulled into the driveway slowly. I turned off the engine and sat there. The house looked completely normal from the outside, just tended to, cared for, like someone had been living there. I got out of the car and walked up the path, and I noticed the welcome mat was different. I had a plain brown mat. This one was navy blue with a small anchor on it. Nautical, cheerful. I stood on my own porch looking at someone else's welcome mat. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The inside was clean, not just tidied, thoroughly cleaned. The floors had been swept and mopped. There was a faint smell of lemon in the air, and the throw blankets on the couch were folded in a way I had never folded them. Someone had rearranged the furniture slightly. The armchairs were pulled closer to the coffee table, the way you'd set a room up for conversation. On the kitchen counter there was a fruit bowl I didn't recognize. Ceramic, pale green, still holding 3 oranges and an apple. I stood in my kitchen and looked at those oranges for a long time. I walked through every room. The guest bedroom had fresh sheets on the bed. The towels in the bathroom were different, thick, white, hotel style, hung neatly on the rack. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, the bed was made with a quilt I had never seen, navy and white stripes. On the nightstand was a phone charger, coiled carefully, plugged into the wall. Somebody had been sleeping in my bed. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer before I retired. I am not a man who panics easily. I build things in a logical sequence. I troubleshoot problems from the bottom up, and I do not jump to conclusions. So I sat down on the edge of the bed and I thought it through methodically. My son was the only person with a key. I pulled out my phone and called him. He picked up on the second ring. We talked for about 2 minutes before I understood, with complete certainty, that he had not been to the house. He was surprised by the question. He asked if everything was okay. I told him it was fine, just checking in, and I got off the phone. I went back to the kitchen and I opened the cabinet under the sink. Behind the cleaning supplies, taped to the inside panel of the cabinet door, was a small black box. I had installed it 2 summers ago after there was a break-in 3 houses down the road. It's a simple system, 2 exterior cameras, one facing the front of the house from the roofline, one facing the back from above the garage door. They record continuously to a local hard drive and overwrite footage after 90 days. I had never needed to look at it before. I pulled the hard drive out and brought my laptop to the kitchen table. I want to be clear about what I was expecting to find. I think I was expecting to see a couple of teenagers who had figured out the house was empty and used it as a hangout spot a few times. I was expecting to feel mildly violated and annoyed, call the non-emergency police line, and have a story to tell my son. That's what I was expecting. What I found was something entirely different. I started with the most recent footage from the past week and worked backward. The first file I opened showed a car I didn't recognize in my driveway, a silver SUV, parked neatly to the side. A man got out of the driver's side. Average height, maybe late 40s, dark hair going gray at the temples, carrying grocery bags. He walked up to my front door with a key and let himself in like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like he owned the place. He came out again about 40 minutes later, reversed down the driveway. Left. I watched the next file. A different car this time, a sedan, dark red. A couple got out. A man and a woman, younger, probably mid-30s. They had rolling luggage. They stood at the front door while the woman looked at something on her phone, then tried the door, and it opened. They wheeled their suitcases inside. They stayed for 4 days. I went back further. The silver SUV appeared again and again, twice a week, sometimes 3 times. The man with the gray temples always carried bags in, sometimes carried bags out, occasionally did things around the yard. He was the one who painted the mailbox post. I watched him do it on a Tuesday afternoon in February, working carefully with a small brush, stepping back to check his work. Different couples, different families checked in and checked out. A group of 4 women who sat on my back porch with wine glasses for 2 evenings. A man who came alone and left after 1 night. A family with a small child who left a sand pail on the back steps. Dozens of stays. Dozens of guests. Someone had been running my beach house as a vacation rental for at least the past 90 days, the full length of the footage I had available. And based on the condition of the property, the accumulated small changes, the different welcome mat and fruit bowl and bathroom towels, I was quite sure it had been going on considerably longer. I closed the laptop and sat very still. The man with the gray temples had a key to my house. He had been managing the property, maintaining it, collecting rent from strangers. My house. The house I bought with my wife. The house where my children learned to swim in the ocean. Where my youngest proposed to his girlfriend on the back deck 5 years ago. Where I have a coffee mug on the shelf that still has my wife's handwriting on a piece of tape on the bottom because we used to label our mugs when we had company so they didn't get mixed up. My hands were shaking slightly. I noticed that, and I made myself breathe slowly. I needed to know who he was. I went back through the footage systematically, looking for a clear shot of his license plate. It took me about an hour, but I found one he had parked at a slightly different angle one afternoon, and the front camera had a clean view of the plate. I wrote it down. I also found something else. About 60 days back, there was a night where the porch light was on and the front door was open while he worked inside, and when he came out to his car to get something from the back seat, he was on the phone. He stood there in the driveway, and the camera caught his face directly in the light for about 15 seconds. Clear as anything. I took a screenshot. I didn't call the police yet. I want to explain why. Because I've had people ask me since then why I didn't just call the police the moment I found the footage. The answer is that I've learned in my life that when you act before you understand the full picture, you often make the situation worse. I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with before I made any moves. I had a neighbor, 3 houses up, a retired sheriff's deputy named Gerald, who I've known for 15 years. He still had contacts at the county. I drove up to his house that evening and showed him the screenshot and the plate number. He looked at both for a moment, then told me he'd make some calls. Gerald called me the next morning. The silver SUV was registered to a man named Dennis, 49 years old. He ran what appeared to be a small property management company, but when Gerald's contact looked closer, the company had no verifiable office address, no business license in the county, and only 3 reviews online, all glowing, all posted within 6 months of each other, all from accounts with no other activity. I asked Gerald if that was enough for the police to act on. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, probably not on its own, but there was more. Dennis had a civil judgment against him from 7 years ago. A landlord in the next county had sued him for collecting rent on a property. Dennis had no right to manage. Dennis had lost the case and been ordered to pay back several $1,000s. Gerald said it looked like he'd never paid it. This was not the first time Dennis had done this. I want to tell you what I felt when Gerald said that. I have spent my adult life building structures designed to last: bridges, drainage systems, buildings that people trust with their safety. I have always believed in systems, in rules, in the orderly way that things are supposed to work. Hearing that this man had done this before, had been caught before, had been ordered to make it right and simply hadn't, and had then gone and done it again to me, to my house, to the place where my wife's coffee mug still sits on the shelf, what I felt was a very cold, very focused anger. Not hot anger. Cold. The kind that doesn't go away. I called my son that evening and told him everything. He wanted to drive down immediately. I told him to wait a few days. I had some things I wanted to do first. The next morning I spent 2 hours on the computer. The vacation rental platform that Dennis had been using to list my property has a mechanism for reporting fraudulent listings. I documented everything: the footage, the screenshots, the plate number, Gerald's information about the prior judgment. I submitted the full report. Then I called the platform's fraud line and spoke to someone directly and told them I was also contacting the county sheriff's office and would be filing criminal charges, and that I expected the listing to be taken down immediately. The listing came down within 4 hours. Then I called the sheriff's office and filed a formal report. The deputy who took my statement was thorough. She explained that what Dennis had been doing likely constituted fraud, theft of property use, and potentially wire fraud if he had used electronic means to collect payments, which he obviously had. She told me to preserve all the footage and documentation and that a detective would be in contact. I also sent a letter certified mail, return receipt to the address listed for Dennis's company, which turned out to be a mailbox store in a strip mall 2 towns over. The letter stated clearly that he had been recorded conducting unauthorized commercial activity on my private property, that I had filed a police report, and that I was pursuing full legal remedies. I sent a copy of the letter to the county civil court that had issued the prior judgment against him, noting that the judgment remained unpaid and that he appeared to be engaged in the same pattern of behavior. 2 days later, my son arrived. We sat on the back porch in the evening, and I told him the whole story from the beginning while we watched the sun go down over the water. He was furious on my behalf, which I appreciated. He also kept shaking his head and saying he couldn't understand how someone could just do that, just walk into someone else's life and take up residence in it like you had any right. I told him I'd been thinking about that too. Dennis had seen something that looked unoccupied and had made a calculation. He had looked at my house sitting quiet on that road, no cars in the driveway, no lights on, and he had decided that the absence of someone was an opportunity. He had put in the work: the new welcome mat, the raked gravel, the yellow flowers, not out of care, but out of investment. He was protecting his product. He wasn't maintaining my house. He was maintaining his inventory. What he hadn't accounted for was that the absence of someone does not mean the absence of ownership. The detective called me about 3 weeks after I filed the report. He had spoken with Dennis. Dennis had initially tried to claim that he had a verbal agreement with the previous owner of the property, which was not only false, but also irrelevant since I had owned the house for 22 years. When the detective pointed out the footage, the documented stays, the rental income that Dennis had collected, Dennis had gone quiet. The detective told me that Dennis was being charged with multiple counts of theft of services and fraudulent use of property. Given the prior civil judgment and the pattern of behavior, the district attorney's office was taking it seriously. He also told me that investigators had identified at least 2 other property owners in the region who appeared to have been victimized by the same scheme. He had done this to other people too. I don't know what's going to happen to Dennis in the legal system. I've been told these things move slowly, and I've made my peace with that. What I know is that the listing is gone, the charges are filed, and the documentation is solid. My son changed all the locks the weekend he visited, and I've upgraded the camera system to one that sends alerts to my phone in real time. But I want to tell you about the last thing I did before I left the house to drive home that first week. I went through every room and I put it back the way it was supposed to be. I put the original throw blankets back on the couch. I found them folded in the hall closet, which told me Dennis was at least keeping them around, maybe to swap back out if he thought someone was coming. I took the navy quilt off my bed and folded it and set it on the porch. I took the fruit bowl and the new towels and the welcome mat and the clay pots and I put all of it in a pile on the driveway. Let Dennis come collect his inventory. I remade my bed with the blankets that have been on it for years. Then I went to the kitchen and I opened the cabinet and I took down my wife's coffee mug, the one with the tape on the bottom and her handwriting. I held it in both hands for a moment. It was still there. Everything that actually mattered was still there. I made a cup of coffee and I sat on the back porch and I listened to the ocean. And for the first time in 8 months, I felt like I was home. What I want you to take from this is simple. If you have a property that sits empty for any stretch of time, please put cameras up. Not complicated ones, not expensive ones. Just cameras with local storage that run continuously and that you check when you return. The system I had cost me less than $200 and it recorded everything I needed. Dennis had counted on the fact that I wasn't watching. Most people who do what he does count on that. Make them wrong. And to the families who paid Dennis to stay at a house he had no right to rent out, I'm sorry. You did nothing wrong. You thought you were booking a legitimate vacation and you trusted a listing on a platform that should have caught this. I hope the platform's fraud process made it right for you. As for Dennis, I hope the civil courts finish what they started 7 years ago. And I hope the criminal courts finish what I started this spring. But either way, he will never set foot in that house again. It belongs to me. It has always belonged to me. And now every corner of it knows it.